And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, I'm really excited. My guest is Mitch Joel. When brands like Google, Starbucks, Shopify, and GE want to leverage technology to better connect with their consumers, they call Mitch. He's been called one of North America's leading visionaries. His first book was Pixels of Separation, named after his blog and his podcast. And his second book was called Control Alt Delete. He's a speaker, he's an advisor, he's an author. He is the perfect guest to have on and share his journey with us today. So welcome aboard, Mitch. Thanks for coming on board.
My pleasure. My third book is going to be Six Pickles of Separation. It's going to be a cooking book.
Yeah, but make them sour pickles, not half sour. Go commit. If you're going to do it, commit.
Well, Montreal, where I live, is a big deli city, so I don't know if I can clearly commit. I think it takes all kinds in life.
Spoken like there's a very Canadian answer to
True. I'll
that.
apologize now. I'm sorry.
Yeah, right. And you want to apologize in advance for the next thing, just so we get it out of the way. We love our Canadian friends. So anyway, Mitch, you've got a really interesting platform. You've been doing this for a while, and to say the least, it's been wildly successful across multiple modalities: the authorship, the speaking, blogging, etc. So, share with it. How did we get to where we are? Because it's usually never a straight, linear, and logical answer to that question.
No, no. In fact, in my second book, Control Alt Delete, I talk about the sort of squiggly path that life is. It sort of doesn't really go sort of bottom left, top right corner, right? It doesn't move in that
Right.
way. If you really look back on my career, I sort of knew early on that I was interested in media. Back in the late 80s, when I was still in my teens, my first real professional job was actually interviewing Tommy Lee from Motley Crue. And
Oh
I
yeah.
joke, jokingly tell people it was all downhill from there. Um, but yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of my time writing for magazines before there was an internet. I spent time back then actually publishing physical magazines. When the internet came online, I was very much there, and I spent a lot of time figuring out how to get media onto the internet. Helped launch one of the first search engines prior to Google existing. Got involved in mobile content 20 plus years ago, which is a day and age when there wasn't any smartphones or even a mobile web browser at that point. And then running a digital marketing agency. When I started the marketing agency with my partners in the early 2000s, I just wasn't really a natural salesperson. And so my default was, well, there's this cool new thing called blogging. Let me just sort of share my thinking. And I was doing it a lot, 7 times a week, basically, with no days off. And then when podcasting came out, I just thought, well, this would be an interesting way to take a bit of a break from writing. I could just talk. Um,
Right, right.
Little did I think, 14, 15 years later, I would still be publishing at that pace and both the podcast and the blog. Little did I think that that platform would lead to an interest in having two big, book deals,
Right.
nor a speaking career that came out of that for sure. So it was more a thing of just sort of rolling with the punches and doing what felt comfortable and doing what really felt somewhat natural to me. And I say somewhat natural because I don't think public speaking is ever natural unless you're a freak.
Right, exactly. So a couple things that you said there that are really interesting to me that I want to push on a little bit. So, you've gotten a couple of great book deals actually, right? But I would argue, and I'd want to get your take on this, that part of what the publishers saw in you is not just brilliant content, but you already had followership, you already had a platform, you already had an audience, and through the power of the internet, you know what they want from you and they know what to expect from you. So can you talk about sort of how that plays out? Because I think a lot of people are so content obsessed that they forget that you've got to have someone to put that content out to that it resonates with.
There's a lot of things underneath that. I think, here as we sit in 2019, having a platform is like the only reason most people get some kind of book deal unless they're famous. Back when I did my deals, which again was sort of the mid or early 2000s, it was a bit different. I think you're right in that there was an understanding by the publisher, and mine happened to be Hachette Grand Central, that there was going to be a lot of heavy lifting done by myself and my agency in terms of marketing and talking about it and speaking. And the answer to that is, of course, there would be. Like, we were excited to do it. But I also think that it was a time when publishers were very much looking to publish books on that topic. And again, you're sort of walking into a world where someone has a bit of a platform and is building a name, and they have a title like Six Pixels of Separation, which wasn't like a dummy's guide, not to belittle that, and it wasn't like a sort of digital marketing 101 or social media is happening. It sort of had a bit of a vibe and a flair to it, and they wanted a piece of that too. So it was a little bit different than it is today, but I mean, there's no doubt that when I sit down with authors and I do a lot of that work, when we look at things like the book proposal or what it takes to get in front of an agent or publisher or even self-publishing to create the business plan for it, the platform is huge. And what I mean by huge is not just that you have to have a huge platform. I don't think you have to have a huge one. You have to have one that really matters. And I think my big lesson over the decades that I've spent writing and building platforms, because even when I didn't own the platform, I still had a platform with major publications, is that you really have to, it's sort of two things. One is you have to really care about your audience, which I think is true, but I think more than caring for your audience, you really have to stay true to your voice. And my voice is a journey. My voice changes over time. My voice changes from the genres that I'm writing or talking in or speaking to. But, like, I care very little about my analytics. I care much more about what's in my notebook in terms of my thoughts and ideas and how they come to be crystallized, right? Is that an article? Is it a blog post? Is it a piece that goes into a speech? Is it something for a book? Is it all of the above? And I spend a lot of my energy, like I always call myself an infovore, like I just consume a lot of stuff. And I just spend a lot of my energy thinking about that stuff and where it might fit. And I'm very respectful of the audience. Like I'm not, I'm not one to just publish everything and put everything on Instagram and share everything on Facebook. And I try to be very, very selective and respectful of the publish button.
Okay, Mitch, that's fantastic. What are the things that have evolved or changed in a way that's really, really noticeable in the last 10 or 15 years, right? So when you started to build a followership and blog daily and such 15 years ago, the world was a little bit different. So if I were sitting there today at home thinking, all right, I'm going to do what Mitch did, I probably shouldn't follow that exact playbook, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, I'm very much a do as I say, not as I do. Because the type of content that I'm very passionate about isn't sort of the thing of the day. Like if you look at my content platform, it's long form text and long form audio. And the word of the day is like short video, live streaming, selfie, Instagram, and even with podcasting being popular, like a lot of the shows are like, this was a shorter show, it's 20, 30 minutes. Mine tends to go, a bit longer, probably double that, sometimes triple, depending on the guest. So I mean, everything has changed in the sense of even speaking. There's this whole industry where people that come out of college and want to be a professional speaker. That's weird.
Right. You, by the way, if you've just come out of college and want to be a speaker, newsflash, you really don't have much to say.
Well, but
Said the disgruntled.
you'd be surprised, Peter. Like there's a lot of people making a really healthy living by choosing a topic and just really practicing it like they would in theater and sort of. And again, there's people who give advice and there are people who speak from experience. I happen to be aligned with you that I like people who speak more from experience than advice, but
Sure.
there's a massive audience for that. If you look at book writing, I mean, how it's changed so much. I'm in a day and age now where people basically self-publish, and we had vanity publishing and self-publishing before, but I mean, real self-publishing now. People will spend, 80 to $200,000
Sure.
self-publishing,
Yep.
having you can pay your way into the airport bookstores, into the Barnes and Nobles of the world now, which is a bit strange. So, I see everything changed in a very dramatic way, and I don't say that in a negative. I think it just provides a platform for more opportunity. It just means that more speakers are being hired, more people are looking to create books in different ways. Amazon Kindle is a great example of that, and content just sort of develops and evolves, and you see people become extremely famous and extremely successful by just doing great on Instagram.
Sure. Well, and the rules are totally different. Back in the day, and it wasn't that long ago, 10, maybe 15 years ago at most, there was the unofficial rule in publishing where, as an author and a thought leader and a speaker, you need to get the book, a new book out every 18 months, right? And now there aren't any rules around that anymore. And in some cases, the way folks are writing a book is sort of a forensic compilation of, 2 years of blogging. And there's no right or wrong. It depends on what is the right fit for your audience, in the right modality.
Yeah, I also
Next question
think
I have.
I also think that it's very aligned with like Seth Godin's thinking around
Yep.
gatekeepers. Like it is true that we used to have a higher respect for, people who are published in the more traditional places or had a traditional book publisher. And I think that the removal of the gatekeepers has also opened the floodgates up in a dramatic way that creates a lot of opportunity.
Well, I think that's right. And I always say, I think I'm one of the only dorks left that when I download a new book on my Kindle, I go back to the filler pages to see who the publisher was because I'm in the business and I'm curious.
Me too.
But most people, it starts with these were the best of times, these are the worst of times. Like, you don't know who the publisher is. Does it really matter? What you're buying is the author, what you're buying is the thought leadership. Next piece I've got for you, because you've done a really masterful job of this in terms of exploring various modalities. So, blogging daily and podcasting daily, two very different things. So, can you talk about the various modalities and then your choice of frequency in terms of cadence?
Yeah, so the podcast is weekly. That's the one podcast,
Weekly,
six
sir.
six
Yep.
pixels of separation. I do another podcast which is more music based that I do monthly, where I interview bass players, but it has a similar format. Blogging, do I call it blogging anymore? Like I think I've sort of even shifted that language for the nature of the world to be more like article writing. I guess I call it now. And yeah, I do try to get somewhere in the 4 to 6 range every week. What's the difference? The podcast, I'm thinking about it more from the perspective of what's that itch that I can't seem to scratch? Is it and usually it's driven by a book or an author or an area of thought. So it could be
Okay.
blockchain or artificial intelligence. It could be so and so published a new book. It could be I don't understand this part of business or the world, and who would be the best person to speak to about that. And I look at those to be more conversational. Can I invite the listener in to a room where they might not have had access previously to a conversation that they shouldn't necessarily be hearing? If you know what I mean. That's sort of the
Right.
spirit by which I want to bring to a conversation. So I spend a lot of time thinking about that conversation and the areas. It's almost like if someone didn't, someone who you really respected invited you for coffee, you wouldn't just show. At least I wouldn't just show up. I'd sort of want to have some notes on that. The blogging and article writing is a little bit different. I tend to wear more of my journalist hat there, and the only
Okay.
difference with the journalism world that I occupied for a while, and writing articles and blogs now, to me, is I add a bit more me versus when I was typically writing professionally, there was very little me or I, and from there, it's more of like.
So you were the medium, not nobody cared about the messenger, but now we do care about your perspective, your take, maybe some of your personality and
Y-
fingerprints on it.
Yeah, and again, I think I'm just stuck a little bit in that type of training from when I was younger that I don't embrace those things very well. Like you're right, and it's true, but I tend to not embrace it. I tend to still live in a world, and maybe it's a world of disbelief, that my content is more important than that it's me or that I've written it, or that the fact that it's published is more important than where I'm speaking today or who I took a selfie with. And again, I don't know where that's from. I just don't. I don't. I love attention to the work. I hate attention on me, and I struggle with that a lot.
So let's talk about. So that's a fascinating point because I think there are people fall on a continuum there. There are some folks out there call themselves authors and thought leaders that it's all about them. That for some reason they think the world is so curious that you have to Instagram your the smoothie that you had and the latte that you had and here I am getting into a car and it's like okay maybe that's part of their brand or whatever. And then there are others that almost hide too much behind their content and are a little bit shy, a little bit more introverted. So it sounds like you do a nice job of balancing that with the default towards the content is the rock star, not Mitch. You're in service of the content, but play with that a little bit. Does
It
that
does to
resonate?
a certain degree. Like the analogy, and I wrote an article about this not that long ago. I was talking about podcasting because we were seeing this sort of boom of it now, and I spend a lot of time listening to podcasts, and I don't like them. And I was trying to like unpack why, because there's like really smart people and they have really impressive shows on really impressive networks. And what I realized going for my morning walk one day was I know what it is. It's the fact that the person who's hosting the show is making it all about them and how smart they are and how great they are and how many other things they're doing versus it really being the attention on the guest and the gracefulness of that. And I guess it's like if you went to a friend's house and all they did was show you all of their stuff versus them inviting you in and making you feel comfortable and asking you what type of tea you like or whatever, like making you feel welcome there versus
Sure,
it being
sure.
look at me. And I feel like that microscope that I sort of reflected on the state of podcasting is similar in other pieces of content. It's the whole thing where people start off talking about something. They're like, as I wrote in my best-selling book that the world loves and is in 18 million libraries and is a number one bet. Like all of that stuff, just it makes me throw up a little bit in my mouth. And I get why people do it, and I understand why we do that, why we need to do it in a world where everybody's a media platform. But I tend to default, maybe wrongly, to this place of it's almost like Aerosmith, let the music do the talking. Like let the content do the talking.
Right, right. Well, and I think that's right. I always say there's this combination between sizzle and steak, right? So there's some folks that are all sizzle, no steak. They get a lot of attention. They might be commercially successful. I always find the things that are really interesting and intriguing, at least to me from a content perspective, are more the things that have a lot of steak. There's a lot of meat to it, and they might not be very sizzling, right? Like they're maybe a little more introverted. They're not as self promotional. They're not whatever. That's where you actually find some of the hidden gems versus that. But I think the other point that you made that was interesting is we do live in a world that requires, depending on your opinion, some amount of promotion, some amount of marketing, right? And there's various degrees to which that's appropriate. So how does that play for you?
Yeah, I don't know that I have an answer to that. I feel like everybody does what they want to do and what they're comfortable with. And like if you want to stand at the top of a building and scream, look at me, and or do a lot of selfies or do a lot of sort of more reckless marketing. And I see a lot of reckless marketing too, where people try to create some sort of social connection between themselves and someone else when it doesn't exist. And they're just sort of leveraging maybe a quick picture that was taken in a hotel to be like, we're best friends type of thing. And I I genuinely believe in the audience, and I genuinely
Okay.
believe that the audience finds the content they want. And if you want that type of content, I'm probably not going to have you in my audience. And if you're sitting there going, I want more depth, or I want less about somebody who's just being braggadocious or talking about themselves or their network or what they did, I hope to capture and occupy more of that type of audience. And I think the lesson for people listening to this, and even to myself, that I often have to repeat to myself, is that's okay. Like I don't need to have millions upon millions of followers. Would it be nice? Sure. Do I morally think that's the better way? Sure, of course I do. Does that make it necessarily fairer or how it will be? No, it doesn't.
So where do you go a little bit outside of your comfort zone? Because we all want to stay in our lanes, but we all need to take a little bit risk and stretch and remain authentic. So what are the things to you that might border on, yeah, that's a little bit out there for me, but it's worth experimenting with or trying.
I do it a lot and I don't like it. It's really it would be like this sort of selfie stuff that I post on either Facebook or Instagram, or the I'm at this event talking. And I know that people are interested, and I know that it's interesting. I don't disagree that it's not. I just,
Yep. Yep.
whenever it's about me, I just sort of go like, I know I have to do this. I know this is what gets people to like, share, and talk about it. I know it keeps me in the zeitgeist, but I can't sit here and tell you that I love it or I feel good about it. And the filter that I've always used, and I've talked about this before, and I talk about it not just because I'm a huge fanboy, but I get the chance to actually connect with this individual and I respect them and I've spent time with him, is it's Seth Godin. I always ask myself, like, what would Seth Godin do? Like, would he do this? And so when I do those things, and I know Seth wouldn't do those things, I do get kind of grossed out. But I also do understand that Seth has a much bigger and widely accepted platform and also doesn't have to do some of those things anymore, which is one point. But the other point could be, is that really true? And that by maybe just sticking true and clear to that sort of filter, you'll still maintain your audience. And it's more of, again, what Seth would say is the sort of drip, drip, drip over time versus trying to run after that attention. And I think it's when the attention is not on the content that I'm always like, ugh, but I do it. Hey, here's the latest podcast, and so is on it, and check it out. And
Sure.
every time I hit publish, I'm like, ugh, you know.
Well, that's great, though. Well, this has been awesome. From the guy that hates podcasting, I hope you hated this one a little
No,
bit
I
less
love
than most.
podcasting. I just hate most
Um,
podcasters. You're not one of them.
oh, okay. Okay. Now, I don't know if I should aspire to be hated or not as hated. I'll have to think about that later. So, out there today is someone in a position similar to where you were 15 years ago when you started down this journey. What would you say to them as we start to wrap here that they should be diving into or considering if they're going to go down this path?
I do believe in the power of telling real and authentic stories. And I think people tend to hold back or use industry jargon or get stuck in acronyms or try and think of like, what will everybody accept? And I think there's a bit of something missing in truly finding your own voice in a space. It'd be great if you can occupy space that is completely unique and that nobody's really in. It's somewhat unrealistic now, but you can always have a unique voice in the space. And I think if you actually take and evaluate and look at the stuff you love, it's probably someone with a unique voice. So don't shy away from experimenting. You're going to make mistakes. People are going to get mad, and it's going to be pretty bad at certain points. But overall, if you can create that unique voice, that's going to trump if you're creating a lot of content, where you're creating it, how you're creating it, if you're creating it, blah blah blah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you being you and just being your authentic self and sharing your journey with us, because I think there's a lot here for folks to process and digest and take into account when they're building out their platforms and doing their thing. So thanks so much for joining us today, Mitch. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Peter. I appreciate you.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.